Okay, and welcome back, students who are taking Math for Business and Finance and Math Applications. And we're working on the word problems, the odd numbered problems for Chapter 21. And sorry about the last video when problems 16 and 17, what turned out to be relatively simple. I started, like I said, I just do things out of my head. And so I made a slight mistake, and then on top of it, things kept on popping into my head, and that's all stuff that I keep in the back of my head, okay? And I just, what was a simple problem became more confusing, I think, by the end, but hopefully just watching the very first half of the video, you'll have picked it all up, right? So I'll try not to do the same thing for these problems. And again, if you don't understand something, watch the video again and again, or contact an instructor. Okay, 2119. Maytag Company earns $4.80 per share. Today's stock is trading at $59.25. The company pays an annual dividend of $1.40. Calculate A, the price to earnings ratio, rounded to the nearest whole number, and B, the yield on the stock to the nearest 10%. Okay, so remember the PE ratio, all right, is the price of the stock. And the way you think about it is price to earnings, a ratio. So a ratio is a fraction, and I'm talking about price, which would go on the top, and earnings on the bottom. Okay, that's the PE ratio. That's how I remember it. I don't memorize a formula. Okay, and so that gives me 59.25 on top because that's the price that it's trading at, and the earnings are $4.80 per share. So when I divide the 59.25 divided by $4.80, I actually end up with 12.343, but I'm rounding to the nearest whole number. So 12.3 becomes 12 as a PE ratio. Okay, so the PE ratio is equal to 12. All right. Now, it says B, calculate the yield on the stock to the nearest 10%. Okay, so if I'm looking at the yield percent, we're talking about how much we're getting in return on our investment. In this case here, it's a dividend, and of course, what we're paying for the stock, or what the price of the stock is, which is the price or the cost. Okay, so in this case here, we're talking about $1.40. Let me erase that. $1.40 is the dividend, and the price of the stock is $59.25. So that's 1.4 divided by 59.25, which gives us 0.0236. And since we're rounding to the nearest tenth, this is a decimal, right? To the nearest tenth is here. We look to the right, 6 is greater than 5, so we're going to round up. So we end up with 2.4% is our yield percent. Okay. All right, next problem. 21. All right, the following bond was quoted in the Wall Street Journal. 5 bonds were purchased today and 5 bonds were purchased yesterday. Well, 5 bonds were purchased yesterday and 5 bonds were purchased today. Same thing. How much more did the 5 bonds cost today in dollars? Okay, so we're looking at a closing price. Okay, so let's do today first. Okay, because this is the quote for today. So we're looking at a bond price of 100.875. Okay, and remember, we move the decimal over, So we have 1.00875, and we multiply it by 1,000 to get the value of the bond, okay, which 0.00578.001, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the value of the bond is 1,008.75. Okay. Now, just a quick aside, and you saw me do all of this here math, okay, in order to get at the value of the bond, right? If I look at the closing price, all I'm talking about here is moving the decimal place, right? One place, right? But I'm having you do until you can until you see the correlation between the closing price and the actual price of the bond in order to know how many decimal places to move. You're moving it one place in that particular instance. It's better to do the math in order to arrive at the price of the bond, okay? Until you can get accustomed, you just intuitively you see the difference between the quoted price and knowing what the price of the bond is. I wouldn't, I get a little confused here because I have to actually be doing all of this here math in order to arrive at the price of the bond. When I look at this here closing price, I know that the price is 1,008.75 cents. And that seems easy because this is at a, closing at a premium, but you also have to be able to consider what happens when you're closing at a discount. So I suggest that you do the math enough times until you can actually see the correlation, okay? And then you wouldn't actually have to be doing all of the math, all right? So with that said, we're looking at a price of 1,008.75, and since there were 5 bonds purchased, that's going to be times 5. That means the cost of the bonds today is $5,043.75. Okay. Now, we have to consider, since this is today. Okay. So let me change. This is yesterday. If the price of the bond today is 100.85 and the net change is 1.18, I'm sorry, 1 1/8. 1/8, the equivalent, if you divide 1 and 8 into 1, you get 0.125. Okay, that's how I know what that decimal fraction is. So we're talking about the net change being 1.125 from yesterday. Okay, and since the price is, the price is up from yesterday, that means we're going to subtract that 1.125. Okay. I mean, think about it. Now let's just use easy numbers here. If I'm at 100 today and I'm up 5 from yesterday, right? That means I had to go up. Well, that means I have to subtract 5 because yesterday was 95. And if I'm adding the 5, I get the 100. So when I'm up, I have to, in order to get the price from yesterday, if it's a positive number, I'm going to subtract. If it's, if it's a loss from yesterday, I'm actually going to add it. Okay, you just sort of like do the opposite, right? So I'm going to subtract the 1.125. That means the price yesterday was 99.75. Okay, and again, if I do all of this math over here, right, 99.75, move the decimal place over, 0.9975, because remember that's a percentage, right? And I multiply it by 1,000. I end up with 0.0057999, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I have $997.50 is the value of each bond, and I had 5 of them, so that ends up being $4,987.50 was the value of those 5 bonds. Okay, so that's the value of the 5 bonds yesterday, and the value of the 5 bonds today is the 5,000. So today I have 5,043.75, and yesterday I had 49.87.50. So the difference between those two is $56.25. So that is, how much more did the bonds cost today than they did yesterday? $56.25. Okay. All right. So with that, I'm going to stop here. And if you didn't understand that, go back and rewatch the video. I don't think I made it that confusing. The only catches that I would make to this particular problem is when you're looking at the net change, and whenever you see an eighth like that, 1 1/8, all you're doing is taking the 1/8 and you're dividing the 8 into 1 to give you your decimal equivalent. I mean, it's the same as like 1/2, right? Is the same as 0.50, or 1/4 is 0.25. You're dividing the 4 into the 1. Well, you're doing the same exact thing. 8 into 1 gives you 0.125. If it was 3/8, right, it'd be 8 into, divide 8 into 3, and that gives you 0.375. Okay, so that's just a little something that I wanted to point out when you're doing this problem that you haven't seen before. Okay, when you get these odd numbered fractions here. Okay, but otherwise it's pretty much straightforward. Oh, and the only other change is that when you're looking at the close price today and you see a net change, if the net change is a positive, that means you have to subtract it from the close price in order to get the price yesterday. If this here net change is a negative, you add it, right? So you would add it to today's price in order to get the price yesterday. Okay, because that's the yesterday's price is not quoted. There's no need for it. People are more interested in the net change because they, it's a hard number that they can latch onto mentally. If you put yesterday's close plus today's close on a chart, first of all, they have to think through what the difference might be, and secondly, it's very easy for them to pick up the wrong number when they're doing their calculations. So they only put the net change. They don't put yesterday's price on the charts. Okay. All right. So again, if you didn't understand something, watch again or contact an instructor, and I'll see you in the next video.